Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast series brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. My name is Saeeduddin Faridi. I'm a research analyst at ISAS and I will be your host for today's episode on air pollution in North India. It is widely known that parts of northern India are amongst the most polluted in the world. As the winter months approach, the region extending from Punjab up till West Bengal experiences a rapid decline in air quality. This exposes people living in this densely populated region to deadly illnesses such as lung cancer, stroke, and heart disease. The government in Delhi and at the central level have tried to undertake measures such as banning of construction activity, vehicular restrictions, a ban on fireworks, and attempts to reduce stubble burning. These measures have not shown any considerable success. Increasingly, we have also seen the issue become decentered from Delhi within India, and now several South Asian countries and cities feature on the list of the most polluted. Today, we will be discussing some of these issues around air pollution. And to do that, we have with us Mr. Siddharth Singh, author of the book titled The Great Smog of India. Siddharth also works at the IEA, the International Energy Agency, as an energy investments analyst. Welcome to the podcast, Siddharth.
Thank you so much for having me, Syed.
We'll get right to it. So, for several years now, air pollution in a large part of North India has reached an extreme level, mainly during the winter months. What makes this region prone to such extreme levels of air pollution?
Thank you, Syed. I think that's a very good question. To understand the problem that ails North India in the winter season, we need to first take a step back and understand the problem of the baseline pollution that is consistent through the year and across the country. So, the major categories of pollution, air pollution in India are transport, industry, construction, and of course firewood for cooking. Now, if you look at each one or each category here, we see that unfortunately India is using perhaps older technologies or practices that are not conducive to good air quality. For example, take transport. Although we do have good quality fuels available in the market today, unfortunately, the nature in which vehicles are managed and the quality in which they are usually kept, unfortunately, means that the levels of pollution are higher than you would see, for example, in the Western counterparts. Industry, the same thing. We are unfortunately prone to using coal, which is a very cheaply available fuel, instead of natural gas and other clean fuels that may be available again in the markets around the world but are more expensive. Construction, are maybe in the cities you now have some codes for construction that help contain construction dust, but that's not always the case. In fact, you may have read the headlines recently that Mumbai recently has topped the list of some of the most polluted cities in India and Asia, and this has happened because of a lot of construction work that has recently started in the last several months in Mumbai. Similarly, firewood for cooking, while it's not an urban problem, the problem exists around the cities because it's a problem pervasive in much of rural India. Instead of using LPG or other forms of clean cooking, homes are forced to use firewood because that's the cheapest available fuel. Now, what this means is that all cities across the country, and not just cities, we have to understand it's not just an urban problem, it is a pan-India problem. This contributes to a very high level of baseline level of pollution in the country, higher than many other counterpart countries around the world. What happens in the case of North India, of course, is the winter shock of stubble burning, which due to certain type of practice that has evolved over the years, especially practices that became popularized in the aftermath of the Green Revolution, we have seen that the number of crops in a year could be 2 or 3. So let's assume 2 in the case of the rice and wheat cropping system, which is in the acronym used in this agricultural community is the RWCS, the rice wheat cropping system. The nature of this system and the prevailing laws around it have ensured that the time gap between the rice and wheat crops is too little, and therefore farmers are forced to clear the stubble or the agricultural residue, and the cheapest way to do it is to pour some kerosene and burn it, and that contributes to this shock. And on top of this, unfortunately, there's the curse of the weather and the geography. So in the winter seasons, the wind speeds half, the wind direction changes, and the nature of the geography is such that northern India is like a bowl, where uh, on the north with the Himalayas on three sides, and in the south with the Deccan Plateau, and the nature of the winds hitting it would mean that any pollution that is emitted in this region gets stuck. There's no way for it to get evacuated, and therefore any pollution just remains and keeps getting piled on day after day, leading to what we call, or what I call rather, the Great Smog of India.
Thank you, Siddharth, for putting all these reasons out for us very clearly. I would now like to come towards the measures. The measures taken to control pollution have appeared to be cosmetic and lacking a long-term or a regional approach. So, how do you look at policy response from the state and central governments in India?
Said, unfortunately, air pollution is still not a top priority agenda at various levels of administration. And this is not very surprising to see, to be very honest. This is something that is seen across developing nations, across emerging economies around the world, where economic and social issues often take precedence over the environment. Either the state does not have the capacity to deal with it, or the state has other priorities which perhaps are more pressing. In this case, for example, say poverty reduction, or ensuring that there's agricultural growth and there's enough food going around for all the citizens of the country, which means that the kind of action that you perhaps need to take on these various sectors is not adequate, and the kind of measures that you can take to ensure that some of the adverse outcomes are regulated, the state does not have the capacity, the skilled manpower, and the kind of training and resources needed to tackle it. So we are at that kind of a state where, unfortunately, economic growth and the associated air pollution will continue to rise faster than the state's capacity to deal with it, and this may go on for a few years until the state is able to take this issue as a priority. And my hope is that that will happen sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, what we have right now is an urban centric approach. We don't realize that of the 1.3 million Indians who die prematurely from air pollution every single year, 70% of those deaths are happening in rural India. And yet, unfortunately, our approach is very urban centric. So we do have the National Clean Air Action Plan. Unfortunately, it takes an urban centric view in that cities are expected to come up with action plans to deal with it, and most of them are copy pasted from each other. So they're not specific to the nature and the geography and the weather of that particular town or city. It would actually be, even though it is a pan-India problem, even if the solutions start in urban India, that would be a start, but unfortunately that has not been the case. What I can say, however, is that there are other things that are being done that would have an impact on air pollution, but it's not under the umbrella of air pollution action. So for example, India has under its net zero by 2070 climate action plan, it does have an ambition to scale up clean energy generation, so clean electricity generation through renewables. It does have an ambition of increasing electrified mobility, and separately there are policies to ensure that there are metro rails being constructed around the country. So you have these kind of measures which are not a part of the air pollution action plan, but do in fact contribute either by avoiding excessive emissions or by ensuring that there are cleaner alternatives available and people are able to transition away from the existing ways of doing things towards these cleaner alternatives.
I want to come back to how you linked measures taken to control air pollution with the state capacity, because an aspect that will incentivize a democratic government to act against an issue such as air pollution is political pressure, which stems from the electorate or the citizens. So, how do you read the public reaction to air pollution, and is air pollution and its related impacts on the political agenda of political parties in India?
So I think we could start with a very pertinent example here, an illustration from something that happened in the early 2000s. It's about 20 years ago or so ago. There was the Supreme Court that, after a few studies, mandated that a few very polluting industries move away from urban Delhi. So this is within Delhi city limits to just out of Delhi city limits. So we're not even talking of a huge relocation. This is just a few kilometers away, outside of Delhi's city limits. What this led to were a pandemonium, and followed by some localized riots, where the employees of these particular industries protested. There was burning of buses, and people ended up eventually even losing lives. Why did this happen? It happened for the same reason that we were discussing some time ago, which is that the imperatives of the Indian society are such that jobs take precedence over environment, even when the people who are being impacted by that poor air quality are those people themselves, those people and their families. But unfortunately, the pressure of needing to earn a living is that trumps any action that can take place, and that's often been the case, I would say, in the case of air pollution action. People, in my experience in the last 10-15 years, have become more aware. They're aware of both the impacts to their health and the need for making some sacrifices towards a better future. Unfortunately, the moment those sacrifices pinch your own employment, your own ability to earn a living and participate in the economy, then it becomes a non-starter. So you would again see the example of what happened during the lockdowns in India. Suddenly, when the COVID lockdowns were announced, people were tweeting about how the air is clean and the birds are chirping and they can see the sky is blue and all of those kind of things. The AQI in Delhi fell into the single digits for the first time, at least since I have started noticing it in the last 10-20 years. And all of that happened at a cost. And the cost was that many people lost their livelihoods, or many people did not unfortunately either have a job, or they were forced to migrate back to their villages. And that's not the kind of air pollution action we want to see. We want to see air pollution action that leads to job creation, that leads to better ways of managing the economy, and better technologies being deployed, and better policies being implemented.
Thank you for the answer, Siddharth. I think that was a very illustrative example of how things play out eventually. I now want to turn to other regions which have tackled similar issues and what their experience has been. So, before New Delhi, Beijing held the tag for being the most polluted city in the world. However, China has managed to drastically reduce air pollution in the city. So, could you shed some light on how Beijing managed to reduce its air pollution, and if Delhi can follow suit?
Yeah. So, I'd like to actually start by saying that unlike climate change, which is the global issue, and climate change often relates to one or two key greenhouse gases such as carbon or methane, so there can be global responses to it. Unfortunately, in the case of air pollution, the constituents of air pollution can differ from region to region, and the causes of air pollution can differ from region to region, and therefore the nature of responses will also have to be localized to what the causes are in that particular region. Okay, so now with that caveat in mind, let's look at what happened in Beijing. In Beijing, most of the pollution back then, perhaps even now, but back then, was largely because of, number one, the usage of coal for heating homes. So coal was being burnt to provide the heat necessary for homes and for industries, and these industries were again based within city limits or close to city limits. And of course there was a massive boom in their economy, so suddenly everyone was able to afford cars, and these cars didn't have the cleanest fuels. So it did not have the unique circumstances that we have in North India, for example, in the form of stubble burning, and so on. And it was mostly related to heating and industries. So their way of dealing with it was that they had, firstly, they took this issue up at the highest levels. So, at the politburos of their particular government systems, they made proclamations that they will deal with it in the most stringent of fashions, which meant that they ended up cutting supply to coal and ensured that homes and schools and offices moved to gas-based heating, and all of this happened within a year or two or three. To the extent that there were schools that did not have heating in certain winter months, this can be very brutal. Imagine children sitting in -10 degrees. It's not an easy situation to be in, but they did that to ensure that coal was no longer used, and that led to a massive change in air quality. And the other one being that they were able to physically move industries, dozens or even hundreds of kilometers into the hinterland, which obviously made a difference. But again, that's the Chinese system. It may not be replicable in other parts of the world. And more recently, China has seen a massive thrust in clean energy generation and in the uptake of electric vehicles to replace polluting diesel and petrol vehicles, to the extent that the most recent figures are that just from 3% of sales in 2020, in 2023 it's reached 26% of sales. That is, electric vehicles now constitute 26% of all the vehicles sold, which is a massive jump in just a short period of time.
Air pollution is now a South Asian problem. India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Pakistan are amongst the world's most polluted countries and will witness the long-term impact it will bring. How important do you think cooperation is amongst the South Asian countries to deal with a crisis like air pollution, which is not local? Is cooperation something that is possible between these South Asian countries?
I think the need for cooperation cannot be overstated. Air pollution knows no international borders. It doesn't have a passport. It goes where it wants to. This is not an issue that is localized only to India or to North India or to Delhi. It is an issue that spans from Pakistan all the way to Bangladesh, with all the states in the middle. This is, of course, the winter smog, what I call the Great Smog of India. Should be the Great Smog of South Asia, for that matter. Of course, there's air pollution in the rest of the country, but ignoring that for a moment and taking a stab at the most pressing problem of the winter months in North India, it is definitely an international issue. And I think that with the Paris Agreement, what happened with climate change, I think there is a scope for something like that in the case of air pollution as well, where you may not have an international body to actually police and monitor air pollution in these regions, and it's hard for any international body to get independent sovereign nations to act. However, a Paris Agreement style formula where every country brings to the table what they can bring towards a common cause, and that understanding of that common cause is a shared understanding that is promoted through, of course, dialogue and the role of research communities and so on. I think that is something that is very much feasible, because it is a lot less political than many of the other problems that are faced in this part of the world. I think there is, each of these countries are independently trying to do something about the problem, and they may not be succeeding, but I think working together can make an impact. You can call it whatever, you can bring this group of countries together in Patiala and call it the Patiala Agreement, but the point is, if every country and every government within India, for example, so you have the different state chief ministers, you have the different ministers across the different verticals within the central government, such as the transport ministry and agriculture ministry and so on. If each one of them was able to adopt air pollution as one of the key metrics towards which they are trying to solve for, I think it can be something that can be measured, and these particular stakeholders can be held to account if we were able to bring them all together. So I don't think this can be overstated at all. Eventually, as we were talking in the case of Beijing, these are problems that are all a collection of small local and locally solvable issues. Every municipality, every panchayat should have the freedom of dealing with these issues, but it should come from a national and international mandate of what needs to happen. So the action may be localized, but it is a shared problem that must be dealt with in a shared fashion.
Thank you for that insightful answer. I think any avenue that brings cooperation in South Asia is always welcome. So I think this is a good point to conclude our conversation today. Thank you very much for joining us, Siddharth.
Thank you very much, Saeed, for having me.
You were listening to South Asia Chat. You can learn more about our work through our website, isas.nus.edu.sg. You can also get updates of our work and our latest publications through social media. You can find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook.